Hi and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen Andrews, writer, bookseller, collector, and today we're going to look at the issue of Blade Runner and why Blade Runner is called Blade Runner. Of course, this isn't the book, this isn't Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep, you know it isn't. This is like a little box set of DVDs, I seem to recall. I've got a Blu-ray somewhere, and yeah, of course, you know, you get sucked into buying these things. And, you know, you get things like this. You get like a frame from the film and all this nonsense. And it just sort of clutters up your house, really. But why is Blade Runner called Blade Runner? And the other day I was watching on a channel which I watch now and again, Bookends and Biscuits, run by Robin, who's very charming. And she's a younger SF reader. She likes a lot of space fiction. She's a very nice lady. And she did a sort of four-way, like a Zoom call with several other sort of readers and talking about doing an analysis of their reading of Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep. And one of them said, I read the book all the way through and I still couldn't work out why the film was called Blade Runner. Well, that's because, of course, the term Blade Runner is not in the book. So we're going to talk where that comes from today. We're not going to talk about the Dick novel very much. Now, if you watch the film, now I remember first watching the film in the cinema when it came out back in about, I think it was 1981. And all I can remember about it was the fact that it blew me away. It was in Cardiff. I was with my mate Andy. I was wearing white drainpipe trousers and mauve eyeshadow, as you did then. And I didn't have this beard and stuff, and my hair was dark then. And at the very end of the film, the credits rolled down, and that's where I learned of the death of Philip K. Dick. There's no internet then, and I wasn't subscribing to things like Locus, and I was really sort of upset because I'd been reading his work for about 4 years then. He was a real favourite writer for me, and to hear he died just as the film came out was really, really sad, you know, because the film transformed Dick's reputation, because I'm one of the people who maintains that without the film Dick would not have become as famous as he is now, and I think that is the case. It's a great shame that his work was more important than any film could ever be. So you'll also see in the credits it says, thank you to William S. Burroughs and Alan E. Nourse for our use of their title. Okay, so the title Blade Runner comes from two sources according to the credits of the film. Now, if you watch the sort of Blu-rays, DVDs, the special editions, what have you, there's a brief reference to that in one of the making of things. And of course there were several people involved in writing Blade Runner. There's Hampton Fancher, who I don't have a lot of good things to say about, and they were producers involved, and there were several people involved in the script to make it come to life. And they didn't really think that the title Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep would work. They thought that Hampton Fancher's titles weren't going to work. So of course there are all sorts of things going around Hollywood at any given time. And what was going around at that time was this. This is Blade Runner, a movie by William S. Burroughs. This is the Blue Wind Press edition, which I bought this, I think, back in the 80s, about 86. And this is a second printing. And this is a screen treatment. So this is a short prose work laying out the story of a potential film to be sold and then to be turned into a script and then filmed. And William Burroughs, of course, was the famous Beat Generation novelist, heroin addict, SF writer, avant-garde modernist, really important figure in modern literature. And this I picked up at that point because I knew of it, but I hadn't been able to get it before. And I reread it recently, which is an interesting experience. So that's what you see coming up. Now, if you want to read Blade Runner, a movie, which is a screen treatment, it's very different, of course, to Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep, because it's a different story, different characters. They have nothing whatsoever to do with each other. But this is back in print from a small publisher. It came back into print about 2 years ago, so you can get it. That's in the UK. You can probably get it in the States as well. And I would urge you to get it if you're interested. However, really, the title doesn't come from Burroughs. Burroughs was a massive science fiction reader. He was a big fan of things like Henry Kuttner. He read a lot of SF in the 60s and 70s. He drew on it and used it in his own work, which is a topic for another video. But what he actually did was draw that title and this book, this screen treatment, Blade Runner, a movie, from this novel here, The Blade Runner by Alan E. Nourse, which was published in 1975. Okay, so that is the actual source of the title Blade Runner. Now, of course, in the film there's two words, Blade Runner. On the novel, as you see, it says The Blade Runner as one word. Okay, so that is the book to watch out for. So what is this all to do with? Well, Alan E. Nourse was a doctor, and he wrote SF novels and stories about medicine, rather like James White did, except that he was probably broader, more interesting, and sort of really had more of a sort of fix in the medical thing than James White did. You know, James White did the Hospital Station books, which are looks at different types of aliens who attend a hospital on this space station, and they're very entertaining, and they're well worth reading. This is a different kettle of fish. Alan E. Nourse was a bit more experimental, a bit tougher, and well worth the read. I'll show you two of his other books just so you get an idea. He was well known and well regarded in the SF field for writing stories about medicine and medical things, and this is RX for Tomorrow. And of course, RX is what you call a prescription in the USA. And of course, because Burroughs was a heroin addict, Burroughs was very interested in how you could use other drugs to get off heroin. And he wrote a lot about apomorphine and various things. So he was always interested in pharmacology. So an RX, a script, when I first read Burroughs' Junkie, it immediately sort of, you discover these terms from drug sort of culture and language. So that's an example of that. And I bought that in Troutmark Books a few years ago in Cardiff, and there's a video of me wandering around Cardiff and you see me buying this, which is great fun. Another one, which is more like the James White sort of thing, this is Star Surgeon. Forgive me, I keep going to the other side because my screen does this weird mirroring thing. So this is Star Surgeon, and that's a Faber book, funnily enough, and you will have seen my video recently, the Faber Mafia, about Faber's British science fiction publishing in the 1970s. So there you go. So there's two books by Alan E. Nourse. But this is the one you really want to get. This will cost you round about £25 to £30. It's not really uncommon, but it's not common either. So I would say anybody who's interested in it, try and snap it up soon, because it's always been a hard book to get, and I've only got it relatively recently. I'm going to talk to you a bit about it. Fundamentally, what Burroughs does in Blade Runner, a movie, is he takes the plot of the Blade Runner and he condenses it, slims it down, rewrites it, puts some of his own feel into things, and the idea then is it gets sold as a screenplay. And Burroughs obviously fully credited Nourse, and Nourse was happy with that. So this is set in a future where, of course, in the USA, there's no national health system like we have in the UK, and people have to pay for medical insurance, and it's very expensive and very difficult. And a friend of mine, James Reich, who's a writer, he's written a couple of SF novels, he said to me when he first moved to the States after we worked together, it's great, Steve, I love it, but the medical insurance is really expensive. This posits a future where people really can't afford medical insurance, and a lot of the welfare is being spent on illegal immigration and on minorities. So it's got a slight, so you could argue it's got a right-wing side to it, but that is in the plot. That's not essentially Nourse's feeling. This is positing this potential future, and it looks at how bad that could get. And Burroughs does tend to emphasize that in this. He does make a deal about that, and comes through a lot more in the characters and things. But again, it's the characters' voices, not essentially Burroughs' voice, because Burroughs is very much for the oppressed and the downtrodden, but he was quite hard-boiled. So there's a central character in this called Billy the Gimp. And of course, the word gimp, when we think of that now, we think of gimp suit, we think of bondage and domination. But of course, what it used to mean was somebody with a physical disability. And it's a term which isn't used that way anymore. And Billy is a character with a physical disability. And he has fallen in with a doctor, because there are lots of illegal doctors practicing because the medical insurance is so expensive. So from the day people are born, they are learning to shoot themselves up with illegally acquired pharmaceutical drugs for all sorts of maladies and ailments. And what Billy does, he manages to get together the tools of the surgeon's trade, the blades, the scalpels, hence Blade Runner. So Billy the Gimp is a Blade Runner. So it's about getting the supplies together. He works in a hospital and he filches them and gets them to this illegal doctor. And of course, many of these doctors are practicing legally as well, but they're doing the underground thing because of the Hippocratic Oath. So it shows a country in a dystopian situation where medical care is just, you know, just a mess. And of course, it's a comment on American society and how people have to pay for medical care. And of course, in Britain, we have the National Health Service, which was invented by a socialist government, by Nye Bevan, a Welshman, I'm proud to say. And that's been under attack by conservatism for a long time. People have problems in the UK with getting dentistry, for example. And of course, the aim of right-wing conservative governments generally is to get people to pay for everything and not have welfare. I mean, how uncivilized is that? So it's a critique of that. Burroughs takes this further in his screen treatment. Because Burroughs was homosexual, there's a lot of sort of things about the sexuality of the young Blade Runners, and he sort of gets fixated on that, and that's part of the flavour of his work. That's something he does. And in Norse, that isn't there. It's just the story of what's happening, the conspiracies which lie underneath this. I'm not going to tell you any more of the plot, so you can get hold of it. If you want to get one Alan E. Norse books, there's lots out there. This is the one to get because obviously it's important in a historical sense. So that's where the title Blade Runner comes from. And of course, it's a good title. And we all remember that bit in the film where, you know, Deckard is on the street and there's the little old guy, the Oriental guy, and he says, "He say you Blade Runner," you know, that sort of cliched yellow peril thing, and there's the little chap on his stall. And yeah, so that's where the title Blade Runner comes from. So it's nothing to do with Philip K. Dick, but it's everything to do with William Burroughs, but it's really everything to do with Alan E. Norse. As you see on the back, it says Contraband Cures. So it's really a comment on that. It's well written. It's quite sharp. It's not a work of literary genius. He's not a massively literary writer. He's just a very competent, popular writer. The thing that it reminds me of, because it's mid-70s, it reminds me a lot of K.W. Jeter's Dr. Ada, which I did a video about on the channel ages and ages ago, which people still don't seem to have discovered, which is a book I read when it was first published in the UK in the late 80s. K.W. Jeter knew Philip K. Dick. Dr. Ada is set in a fairly distant future, Los Angeles, where there's some strange things going on medically, and there's this character called Dr. Ada, and he has an equivalent of Billy the Gimp who's called E. Allen Limit, and they have this relationship, and Dr. Ada is performing some very interesting operations. And you would think in a way that maybe Jeter had read this, but Dr. Ada was written before this was published. It was written in the early 70s, but nobody would publish it until the late 80s because of its content. And Philip K. Dick tried to get people to publish it. And Dr. Ada is still one of the most amazing books I've ever read in the canon of SF. This is my original paperback edition of Dr. Ada. I've got a Blue Jay hardcover as well, which you can still pick up. And this book hasn't been printed for years, and it should be. It's an absolute masterwork. But it's very, very edgy and strange indeed. It has a lot of odd sexual stuff in it, violence, but it's an absolute work of genius. And, you know, if if even a tenth of the SF being written was as good as this, it'd be something. So if you ever see this in any format, pick it up. And do watch my video, which is called Outstandingly Weird, which is how I described this book in a mail order catalogue for a company I used to work for way back in the early 90s, just to sell loads of this. It really should be in print. This is its sequel, The Glass Hammer. My good friend Les Ascott at Morrigan Press published the third book in the sequence, which is called Deatharms. So try and pick up Blade Runner and try and pick up Dr. Ada, and there's Smudge the Cat in the background. They are quite similar in lots of ways. And of course, the whole idea of somebody who is working for a doctor so that they can eventually get their own maladies, you know, sort of looked at, is a really sort of old one. It's almost Faustian. A Revenge of Frankenstein comes to mind for a start. So Blade Runner by Alan E. Norse is the true source of William S. Burroughs' Blade Runner, a movie, the screen treatment, and of course you end up with it being appended to a totally different film, the Blade Runner. And of course the Norse thing never ever got filmed. Great shame, because it would have been interesting. So that's the secret history of the title Blade Runner. Bye for now.